everyone, welcome back to But Why Though, and today we're reviewing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. As always, I'm Kate and I'm here with Charlie.
Hey y'all.
Charlie, why don't you tell the people watching what you do? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a freelance reporter, critic, uh kind of jack of all trades in the industry. I do whatever I can to get paid, to have fun, to show people good things and to talk about fun stuff. I mostly cover video games, food and booze, but I love writing out about entertainment, travel, literally anything. But yeah, I'm so excited to talk about the Great Circle. I've been an indie fan for pretty much my entire life. So I'm I've been really stoked about this game.
And that was going to be like my first question as we kind of talk about expectations. Like what what were you expecting from the game, both like just from a pure maybe critic standpoint, but also like what were you looking for as somebody who has loved Indiana Jones for so long?
So I feel like I this was kind of the way I've been describing it to folks in the build up for the game was I kind of expected this to be, and this is pretty high expectations, but I did kind of expect this to be my version of Insomniac Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Because I like Spider-Man. I've never played an Insomniac game aside from the Spider-Man stuff, and I think maybe one Ratchet and Clank, but that was like after the Spider-Man stuff. Um, but like I never really had that like the same connection with Spider-Man that I have with Indiana Jones, where like, yes, I grew
Yeah.
up watching the Raimi stuff, but Indiana Jones for me is like it's my favorite blockbuster series, bar none. Indy may very well be my favorite like fictional character. It's just kind of firing on all cylinders for me, you know. I mean, you have John Williams doing the score, you've got Harrison Ford, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg. It's just like banger after banger after banger. And so what I'm looking for in a game like this is to kind of live up to that expectation. And I did
Hmm.
kind of have the expectation that MachineGames of any studio in the industry would be able to live up to that. I mean, they are so good at kind of setting up these cool mysteries that tap into mythology and history in a
Hmm.
really interesting way. I think Wolfenstein 2 especially, which is like I think my favorite story in a video game
Yeah.
still. Um, really lives up to that. And I think this was kind of the logical next step in a lot of ways for that studio if they weren't going to make if they weren't going to make another Wolfenstein. So I was that was really what I was expecting. But what about you? What's kind of your history with the
Honest,
series?
honestly, the funny thing is like this, how do I say this? I think as I look back on everything, I think that I may have always loved Indiana Jones more than I love Star Wars or any of anything else. So the
Hmm.
funny thing for me is like I don't think that I would be where I am in my gaming career if it wasn't for Indiana Jones because my love of
Same,
Indiana
totally.
Jones is what made my mother buy me Tomb Raider as the very first game I ever beat on my own. And
Hell yeah.
my deep love for Lara as my favorite video game character is deeply informed by my love of adventuring, finding, unearthing things that have been lost. And fun fact about me is I actually got into college as a classical archaeology major. I
Whoa,
shifted it
really?
once I got there. Yeah. And like, in my PhD work, I was actually really good friends with people in our classics department because I was a religious studies student. And so they were actual archaeologists. And one of the professors that I was under, he did a lot of work on the Dead Sea Scrolls and everything. And he had a framed picture in his office, and it was that picture of Indy punching a Nazi on the back of a truck. And he had it like
Hell yeah.
framed and in his office. You'd walk in, all of it is to say that like the part of me that loves academics came from loving indie. The part of me that loves games came from falling in love with Lara Croft, who is inspired by indie, who I only met because my mother knew how much I loved indie.
Hmm.
So I was hopeful, but I have been let down by the movies that we had recently gotten that I was kind of apprehensive. And I was a little apprehensive about first person. I didn't really like the brawling system when I just watched it happening in the hands-on previews.
Hmm.
But there was something about watching all of the videos leading up to getting to play myself where there was an understanding of Indiana Jones. And that was what you had to get. I think like the first time I saw the book system and they showed the Lucky Hat book where you fall and your second wind comes from picking up your hat. And
Yeah,
I was like, no, like they get it. Like that's Indy. Uh,
100%.
so like going into that, and it sounds like you had really high hopes for it. I was kind of the opposite, where I was like a little bit guarded, where I was like, oh my God, like I don't know. And I felt I don't know up until I started playing. And then it was one of those where I just kind of, oh no, like this is where I'm
Mhm.
supposed to be. So what like as you started playing, do you feel that it met your expectations? And was there anything that kind of stood out to you right off the bat? Like maybe in that
So
first
in initially in that first act, I was actually a little, I don't know if I was let down or
act?
overwhelmed, but I think for me, I I think I just had it took me a little while to like really adjust to
Hmm.
what the game was, not because I didn't enjoy it, but because there's so much going on. And so that first hour I was overwhelmed. I was loving every cutscene, but when it came to gameplay, I was like I wasn't just struggling a little bit, I was struggling to like find momentum, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
But once I got going, man, but every cutscene, I think I mean, that's really what everyone, I've read a ton of reviews for this game, and it seems like everyone is in agreement that the cutscenes and the story and
Yeah.
the broader like writing and narrative and stuff is like ace, just like absolutely perfect in terms of tone. And that was my first impression really was kind of um down to the things that Indy's getting excited about, the way they have him wagging his finger, doing like capturing all these like very distinct
The
Harrison Ford
smirk.
isms. Yeah, the smirk, exactly. And it's just man, it really hit for me. And that was it's something that I definitely expected because I love Machine Games' previous work. Like again,
Hmm.
Wolfenstein 2 is like one of my favorite games, period. And so getting to see them really flex those muscles of just using this like really kind of gruff, stoic, but also cartoonish protagonist that they've had in other games, transferring that knowledge and that ability to write that kind of character and to animate that kind
Yeah.
of character into Indy was just, oh, it made me so excited to get like really into the adventure.
And I think that that was one of the things that I took away was like when you think about Indiana Jones, I think that there's a way to do him wrong where you take the intelligence and it twists into a type of arrogance that isn't
Mm,
charismatic. And
mhm.
what I think Machine Games did right from the jump, and like when you're in Marshall College and you're walking around with your I forget his name, but
Marcus?
with the yeah with Marcus, yeah, and he's kind of following you and you're putting up everything. There's small moments and small lines that Indy says where it's like he is intelligent and he knows he's intelligent, but he's also very respectful of everything that he's handling in a way that like
Hmm.
understood who he was. And I think on the point of the cutscenes, I at first I was like, I don't know how they're gonna do this because they're not using cinematic animations. They're not like it is all using gameplay animations to animate everything. So there's a very
Right.
seamless approach to gameplay into cutscene, cutscene into gameplay. That I think sometimes it does lock you into a pace that I wasn't a huge fan of, but the way that all of the scenes were set up. It's when Marcus closes the door and you're what looking through the glass of Indy's office, looking in, or is it? Oh no, it's in Italy. Sorry, it's when
Mm-hmm.
Antonio goes to close the door of his Vatican City office, and you can see Indy in the background, Antonio in the foreground, and the way that the camera is, that is a Spielberg shot. And I
Yes.
think that that was what was fascinating to me is you're watching this game that is like all of these animations, it is just a game. But the
Yeah.
lighting, the score, and the composition of each scene, you cannot get closer to that than if you had Spielberg come in and direct that himself. Like
Absolutely.
it was
Yeah.
it amazed me. And I kept thinking to myself, I was like, do I like this? Like, this is just so much cutscene. Like, is this cutscene the game? I was like, no, I like all of this. Like, there wasn't a
Hmm.
moment where I didn't want more story, which is wild to me. And I couldn't really understand it. So, like, for you, and what was kind of that balance between the gameplay and the cutscenes? Because I know you did mention that it took you a little bit to get into the gameplay itself. How do you
Hmm.
think it finally finds that stride for you in balancing?
There were a few moments that I kind of point to where it really found its stride, but I think like I'm going to be making comparisons to Wolfenstein 2 probably this entire video, but like the it reminded me so much of getting into that game where as much as I enjoyed the gameplay, I was ravenous with the story. I could not
Yeah.
put it down because I was just rushing from point to point. And I think the thing that really made me want to start savoring the gameplay and start enjoying the exploration was once I
Hmm.
started taking on some of those side missions.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember chasing one of them down. And you mentioned the lighting, which I think really is shocking. It was shocking to me as well because lighting in video games is so difficult, and it's
Yes.
so particular, and it's so technically intensive. And so to see like lens flares the exact same way that they do in the movies in any Spielberg production,
Yeah.
I I like my jaw dropped. I was so shocked to see that, or the way that they frame Indy's eyes so frequently in the same way that Spielberg does, or his face in general. But
Yeah.
seeing those things as I'm kind of taking my time. I'm smelling the roses in Vatican City. I'm
Yeah.
chasing down these like random side quests, which are also like really great. But getting to see and live in these details, feel the tactility of turning keys and pushing doors open with the
Hmm.
stick instead of just pressing a button or walking forward, really was the thing that made me realize, oh, this isn't an Indiana Jones video game. This is an Indiana Jones simulator. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is putting you in in the shoes of him in a way that I did not expect.
And I think that's a really good point because when it first happened, I was like, this is stupid. Why do I have to move the left stick left to open this dumb door? Why do
Hmm.
I? And I think you're right. In Vatican City, when you start kind of going off the beaten path and exploring everything, it's like, no, I want to turn that key. I want to
Yeah.
lift up the hatch. And there's a level of immersion that I think it was almost foreign to me because we play games and a lot of the times we're looking for streamline efforts to get through
Right.
gameplay to pull us through things. But this one very much like the Great Circle and Machine Games is really asking for you to slow down
Yeah.
consistently and to feel like you are actually living and exploring these worlds, which I think for me, like one of the other high points is how beautiful these worlds are. Like walking
Yeah.
into
Oh
the
my
Sistine
God,
Chapel, I, I was
dude.
floored. And what I liked about those side missions, because I think it was very similar for me, where I was like, okay, cool, we're going through, we're doing what is expected. And then I started kind of going after the discoveries. And I unlocked my first safe, like looking at statues underneath, and I just put it together and opened it.
Hmm.
And it started to click that this world wasn't one that was meant to be, how do I say it? It wasn't an achievement list. You were
Right.
actually going through, finding notes, finding pieces of it, and putting it together in a way that it was almost the side mission and the core story missions were one. And finding that out, like I forget what it was, but there was one that I finished and all of a sudden Gina pops up and I'm like, "Oh, I thought I just did a side mission. This is totally a main mission moment."
Right.
The ways that they connect is so brilliantly done that it doesn't it's a simulator. It's not me
It's a
checking off
simulator.
side quest and going to main quest. It is me doing side quest. And because it is a simulator and I'm learning about other stuff that I do need for my main quest.
Hmm.
Oh,
Absolutely. Yeah, like it adds context and substance to story beats in such a cool way without ever somehow it's never like really able to be sequence broken. It's just
Yes.
a very clever way of kind of sowing these extra seeds of mystery while pointing at something that's going to be revealed later on without ruining it, kind of almost making you
Yeah.
excited. It's like, you're digging in the ground for something and you hit something hard, but you don't get to that thing, you don't unearth that thing until the cutscene later on in the story that kind of ties all these things together.
Hmm.
It's really cool how they arranged it.
And I think one of the other things for me, like on the point of it being tactile, is the attention to detail in each of the environments to build out the puzzles and to build out the world is it's really second to none. Like I've seen people say that the puzzles are very simple, but I don't think that matters. What matters is the fact that I'm exploring and looking at everything and touching it and maneuvering it. I mean, how do you feel about like the puzzle difficulty specifically, and then like how they've been constructed across the game? Because there are a lot of them,
There
and
are
it's
so many.
really cool.
It's awesome. So I'm not the biggest fan of this kind of puzzles in games
Hmm.
usually. I find them to be overly precise in ways that can be more a pain in the ass than like rewarding once you solve
Yeah,
them. It's like, oh, there's this thing that was just like not visible to me for whatever reason. Or like
yeah.
there's a letter that I couldn't read because this thing was written in cursive. And in this game, again, because it is all at the service of and going all in on being and feeling like this character, I think it's a really I found it really interesting and really rewarding to, like you said, look at these documents that are so well crafted. Not
Yeah.
just the puzzle itself, but the intricacy of, let's say you're like reading some old piece of parchment. They are not cutting any Machine Games did not cut any corners. I mean, they give you a
Yeah.
disclaimer at the beginning of the game that they did their best to achieve some semblance of historical accuracy with
Hmm.
the things that they were created. And I mean, I'm preaching to the choir. You almost definitely know so much more about this than I do as someone who studied this stuff, but like it feels real in a way
It does.
that doesn't often happen in a video game.
Yeah.
And really, realism isn't something that I care about in video games in general. But when
Yeah.
it comes to this, it's not realism for the sake of realism, it's realism for the sake of archaeology. It's for the sake of the
Yes.
love of the hunt, the love of the culture, the history.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself. Like that is what it is. I will say, like, I've never been a fan of like unorganized because the journal is like a little unorganized when it comes to finding stuff. But that's how like Indy would keep it. And it was crazy to me because there were parts of this game that I usually do not like in games. But
Same.
I was obsessed with that journal. Which if you're watching this and you've been played Indiana Jones, the entirety of your map system, your quests, all of it is just kept in this little leather-bound journal. And it's weathered and it's worn and it feels like something. And I think that that's kind of been one of my biggest takeaways is that every piece of this game feels like something. It feels like they poured their heart into every inch of it trying to do exactly what you said, like not just be real, but to produce something real that was showcasing a wider love of expedition and adventure and the past that I just don't think we get anymore. There's something very specific to me that happens in this game as well is that I think one of the larger conversations that has come up in like archaeology in general, and I would say people who aren't archaeologists having conversations about what archaeologists do, is the idea of some situations, especially from the 1920s to early 1940s, of scientists and everybody coming in and essentially looting and taking it to their home countries to put in museums. But when you talk with people who are preserving culture, museums still have a valuable function because those stories are lost if they're not appreciated and restored. And in the second area, I guess third area, in Giza, we meet Dame Nawa, who is like running Cairo and stealing artifacts back from the Nazis to then put them into the Cairo Museum. And it's not preachy in the way that I felt some of the approach to relics has been in past games. Like there's an over conservative effort to smooth the edges of the idea of being an archaeologist that this
Right.
game doesn't do. And I love it for it because instead you just have Indy making comments like, just make sure you put it in a museum. And you understand from the context, he's not saying steal this piece and put it in something else and take it over here. He's saying steal this and keep it from the people who are literally breaking it and trying to harness it for evil, like respect it and respect the culture, and I'm going to give it back to the Cairo to the people of Egypt. And that's like I, it could be me just be reading into it, but that's kind of like the story that I have experienced being in those circles and in those discussions about like, well, how do you honor a culture that you're not a part of in excavation sites or maintaining historical legacies within like flawed systems. And I think what this game does is it captures the indie that I have always known in the same way that
Mm.
like I don't believe that Lara Croft is just stealing stuff and hurting other people's culture. Like I do think that like the act of archaeology and the act of excavation is done from a place of respect and wanting to preserve that culture. And this game nailed it in like one scene. Like it took
Yeah.
one scene. Sorry, that
And
was
it
a very long
no,
like
no, no, no. Absolutely. I love that. And I think it's that touches on something really cool about this game where it it sends this message in so many different ways, and you see those
Mhm.
ways communicated through some of the different areas. Like in Sukhothai, Pai Lin has a very different mindset about this entire thing,
Yes.
and he's like, "Yeah, totally. Like I'm right there with you. Like whatever
Hmm.
you need, whatever the locals want, like that's what's gonna happen to the stuff that I
Exactly.
find."
Yes.
And I think it's really cool because it doesn't it yeah, you're right. It doesn't preach, it doesn't moralize about the ethics of this thing from some, disconnected point of view. Indiana Jones, and even beyond that, regardless of whether or not it does moralize, Indiana Jones isn't an explicitly good character. He's an
Yes.
anti-hero. He's very postmodern. He's
Exactly.
not supposed to be, he's not Luke Skywalker. He's on Solo. He's
Exactly.
not perfect. He's gonna fail. He's gonna do things that are wrong. And
Hmm.
I love that they're like okay with that. And I think there's less of that in the Great Circle than maybe like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, for example. But
Yeah.
it's different
It's
circumstances, different characters, different narrative, but it still feels true to that character.
hmm No, 100%. And I think like my next question is too, so like we know that Indy was handled so well. What do you think about the rest of the cast?
I loved it. Like I feel like every character had like memorable well, most of the characters I should say. I don't know if there's one that I would think of that I like specifically disliked, but it felt like most of the characters in the game had memorable quotes, memorable quirks, memorable things about them that were charming and interesting. Even the villains, MachineGames, one of their biggest strengths is creating villains that you love to hate.
Yeah.
And adding so many layers to watching these Nazis like terrorize each other, or these corrupt priests be shitty to each other and stuff like that. It's so funny because it's bad stuff happening to bad people
Yep.
always. And then on the hero side, I mean, Gina was such a cool character. She felt perfect within the pantheon of like indie companions. She feels right at
Yes.
home, not just next to his love interest, but next to his dad, in a
Yep.
really fun way.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think it was funny because I was like, man, this game continues the history of Indiana Jones loving strong women and totally letting them make fun of him for sport
Yeah.
because that's just where he exists. Um, and yeah, I loved her. I loved Dame Nawal. I really
Mm.
loved Voss in a way I didn't expect.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think it was because there's a moment towards the end of being in Vatican City where he rips apart this priest And we all know what he's insinuating that the priest has done historically, that
Hmm.
the Catholic Church has done. And it is such an intimidating scene where I was like, oh, like as the children say, they cooked here. This
They
villain,
cooked.
it like his lines, his delivery, all of it was made to be very manipulative in a way that like goes beyond just the Nazism of it all. Like to say it, to be honest, like I think that there are layers to Voss that I think are important to understand outside of like just being a Nazi that I think is really important. But at the same time, like his very existence is also ridiculing everything that the Nazis have done, said, or believe in a really fun way, which of course people who wrote Wolfenstein games,
Yeah.
can only do,
And it's so subtle in the ways that
yeah,
he's constructed too. He isn't um in Wolfenstein 2 the main. Have you played Wolfenstein 2?
I have not played Wolfenstein 2.
Oh, you got to check that game out. But the main villain of that game is like this bigger than life, mustache twirling, just turned up to 11 evil character. And it's very interesting to see the evolution of MachineGames' narrative team. And obviously, that character wouldn't work in Indiana Jones for a number of
Yeah.
reasons. But to see them nail that subtlety of Voss, but still have all that depth, all those layers, watching him, feel so self-superior because he knows how to manipulate people is it, it oh, they cooked like it feels so right in so many ways, and it feels very like a lot like Renee Belloc in Raiders of the Lost
Yeah.
Ark, where he sees Indy as a foil. He sees himself as this foil,
Yes.
as this like superior, smarter, but the same at their core, and he
Hmm.
thinks he can like turn or convert Indy in a really cool way.
Yeah, and I think that there's like what blew me away was this reverence for Indiana Jones, but not in a looking back sort of way. It was an
Yeah.
understanding of, because I think that those are like the two things that happen whenever somebody creates something within such an iconic property is they make something that feels like they're consistently looking to the past and trying desperately to capture it. And then there are people who make something that they honor the past, but they kind of look at what makes it stay important. And I think that that's what MachineGames does here is they take the legacy of indie and they say, okay, cool, how do we add to that? What do we do? I think positioning this game where they position it before Last Crusade is really smart because I think it gives them a contained worlds to play in, but it also
Mhm.
I think that there is a lot of evolution that happens between those movies of indie that this kind of fills that spot and you can understand it even more when you look at this within like a larger canon of who the character is. Um
Right. I mean, even just picking one point of that, like the the way that they contextualize his relationship with Marion, that kind of
yes.
remained a question mark until like Dial of Destiny and Crystal Skull, where it's
Yeah.
just like, oh, this is cool to see kind of threading the needle in ways that weren't connected for us
Yeah.
in 2007 last year,
Yeah.
let alone in like Last Crusade, you know?
Yeah. No, entirely. Um it's it's funny because like I think that there are truly stellar moments and even like during the cutscenes, there were times where I forgot that it wasn't live action because of like the reflection on the eyes or the
Yeah.
way, the texture of the skin. Like there
Oh, the
are
textures are
ways
so
that
good in
like
this game.
the art team here like
Oh my God.
managed to pull something off that I think is really hard if you're not working within like genuinely building cinematics, right?
Hmm.
And so I found myself with my jaw on the floor consistently there. But I would like to know what you think here, because like, we've talked a lot about everything that we think the game does fantastically. Do you think
Hmm.
there are elements that the game could improve on, or elements that you found yourself, okay, this is what may be keeping it, a little bit back.
There are a few. I think the biggest thing is the stealth in general, which isn't necessarily bad. It's
Hmm.
just not very interesting, not evolutionary really in almost any way. Like once you kind of see one part of the game aside from the places you're sneaking
Hmm.
around in. And I've been really meticulous. Like if there's a Nazi, I'm hitting him on the back of the head with a
Oh,
hammer.
yeah, of course.
And so I'm going through these big ass areas, taking out tons of guys, and like the checkpointing is really bad. When you die, a bunch of enemies come back, and it doesn't tell you that even if you are getting checkpoints in a
Yeah.
combat encounter, and things like that that just feel like very shocking rough edges that are there. And I mean, again, going back to Wolfenstein, it reminds me of the New Order in a lot of ways, where I see all of these kinks that I firmly believe can be ironed out in a sequel and built upon.
Yes.
I think the stealth is really really where this game falls apart, and it's really where or it falls apart is intense, but
Yeah.
it's where it's this game's downfall. It's where a lot of the people who
Yes.
did not click with it are kind of criticizing it for the most is the stealth and the combat.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
That's exactly where I'm at. I think that there is the stealth itself was very inconsistent on like view radiuses, being able to
Yeah.
know when they stopped looking at you or if they stopped chasing you. It has like it honestly reminds me a lot. I mentioned in my review, it reminds me a lot of some of the issues that I had with Outlaws stealth when that first launched. Like there was
Mm,
a lot of inconsistent ability to understand where you were in relation to the person. And I would say like I tried very hard to just bonk someone on the head. Half the time it didn't count as a knockout bonk. It was just a bonk, and now I was swarming with Nazis.
right.
And that was the thing where it's like I can applaud the game for pushing you to play like Indy would, right? So like you have limited ammo, you don't have your gun in a lot of places, you have to improvise. It's a
Hmm.
very attempt at immersion, but when you have elements like that that kind of go against you trying to play that way, it really does break the combat for me. Um,
Yeah, and I think the speaking about the gun too, I mean, it just feels weightless
yeah,
in a way that
yeah,
doesn't feel not only faithful to the series, but also, I mean, Machine Games like last two games have been these like spectacular first person shooters, and
yeah,
to see the guns not feel very, I mean, they sound amazing and they feel good to
yeah,
like shoot, but they don't feel good to use. You know what I
yes.
mean? Like the aiming doesn't make sense. The ways that you get kill shots doesn't make any sense. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't not just makes not click with again with Indy, but it doesn't click with their history in a way that I was very surprised to see.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like that too is I think part of that is that you never really have a good understanding of what items are doing damage, especially when
Yeah.
you're fighting the giants or you're kind of doing a more difficult encounter. I wouldn't call them like they are bosses, but like this game doesn't have a traditional sense of boss battle in the way that you would expect, which is good, and I like that. But
Mhm.
while I respect the approach to minimal UI, it makes it so incredibly difficult to not understand what a boss's health is because it
Mm.
just feels like you keep going at it, and at a point the loop starts to break. And I felt that with both giants actually. The one early on at the end of Vatican City and in Giza,
Mhm.
and a little bit farther down into the last area. And I think that that's one of those things is if you want to make combat immersive, which kind of ups that challenging level a little bit, there has to be a feedback loop on what you're doing. And
Yeah.
when I was fighting Locus, I think it's Locus, right?
Mhm.
Him very specifically, I had this moment where I was like, oh crap, I have a gun. I forgot I
I
have a gun. And then I
uh
shot him. And I feel like the better thing in that situation, because when you get shot, your health is like
immediately, yeah.
nuked. Um, I would have rather had that be that situation, right? Because that's a very indie thing. We've only given you 5 bullets, so you're not going to take out this whole room.
Mhm.
But no, I had to shoot him and shoot him and shoot him and shoot him. And then he went down for a little bit. And then he came back up and I had to bonk him some more. And I was like, this doesn't give me the satisfying gun moment that I want from an indie game.
Mm-mm.
Um, which sucks because I know that they took a lot of pride in their combat, but I think that there are just there's not enough of a balance in it to make you understand because it's like I don't know, it's difficult. And I think that was the only time I ever felt like frustrated
Yeah.
with what I was playing.
Yeah, I had a couple moments of frustration, and they were almost always from combat and stealth, where like I had one point in like the last area where I was like pretty decently far through a long
Hmm.
sequence of stealth, and then I got killed, or no, I got caught, and I hit go back to checkpoint, and I got sent back even further back than the last point that the game
Yeah.
had saved, and so I lost like an hour of progress, and yeah, it's just stuff like that. And like the stealth stuff, like I think you're probably in the same boat as me where you don't actually have to kill or take down everyone, but I did,
Yeah. Yeah,
just because
yeah.
it's
No,
fun.
like if you give me the chance to take down a Nazi, I want to kill the room full of Nazis. I'll try to do
Right.
it stealthfully, but like I'm not gonna let these Nazis stay.
No, no, you got to hit him on the back of the head with a hammer, listen to it make one of the best sounds in a video
Yeah,
game, and watch them like fly. It's awesome. And it
exactly.
it never gets old to watch these dudes just like get fucked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like when the trappings of your stealth system are basically don't get seen and you can drag guys out of the way. It's I I don't know. It just yeah, it didn't fully feel like it was what it could have been. And so I
Yeah.
would love to see the stealth system and combat in general kind of polished and expanded upon in a sequel, which I really hope and kind
Yeah.
of think we're gonna get.
Yeah, and I think that that's like the beauty of it is I don't think any of this breaks any of it. I think that it can
No.
make for and I think that that's like my big thing. I ended up giving it an 8 when I reviewed it, and I wrote like 2,600 words on it. And it was just because I had issues with that. The other issue that I had outside of the combat was really just how much you're locked into a pace. And I can
Mm,
respect it for what it's doing because you're in an indie sim and for all intents and purposes like this is just another Indiana Jones movie. You just get to be in it, which I think is what indie fans wanted. It's what I
yeah,
wanted
it's what I
very
wanted. Yeah.
deeply. But there were some moments and I think they that really stand out when an NPC is like doing something and I'm just standing there for like minutes and I'm like, cool. Can't interact with anything. Can't like they're just gonna walk to their closet and pull something out or finish talking and then maybe I can go. And I think that that was that level of locking in, I think was there's a lot of intent behind it and I can respect it. But I think for
Mhm.
impatient players, of which I am one, it
Me
makes
too.
it a little bit hard in some situations because then I'm just like, okay, cool, what am I doing? Or I would run forward and the animation hadn't completed with the person who was with me, which meant I got to the door, but then I couldn't go any further or do anything. I had to wait for them to walk
Mm.
down, and
That's the
then
worst.
so that's those are really my only two issues with the game, but I think they are enough that I think it could make somebody not if you are not a diehard indie fan or even just like if you don't I had a friend ask, I didn't know Indiana Jones was so big. And I was like, dude, what do you mean? But those people do exist. And
Hmm.
I think if you don't have that type of want to be in that space in that way, I do think some of that can overshadow it for you. But I think it by no means breaks it entirely.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I think like, and that's part of the beauty too of this game is like we mentioned this earlier, but it isn't this fan servicey
Yeah.
pandering thing. It stands on its own almost without fail, aside from some
Hmm.
reference to the first movie, which essentially gets handled and taken care of
Yes.
within the context of the game very, very well. But I think, yeah, this isn't just for fans. Like I think even if your friend who doesn't really know the series played this game and picked it up, they would
They would
probably
get something
still
out of
be
it. Yeah.
able to, yeah, find some enjoyment, which I think is a rare feat in this media landscape where everything has to that adheres to canon has to have every single thing that exists within this universe at this time showing up. It's
Yeah.
Darth Vader showing up at the end of Jedi Fallen Order, you know.
Yeah.
It's it's very refreshing in that way.
Yeah, which I think is like the smart thing about putting it in the past and not trying to tie it in with like farther in the past, but like not trying to
Mm,
tie it in with Dial of Destiny or anything like that, but actually putting it
yeah.
back there because like I think it makes it easier to be a gateway for somebody. I think that
Mm,
like if you were looking for, to be honest, I have taken issue in the past with some developers wanting to make a movie instead of a video game. Sorry, Neil Druckmann. Because I don't think it respects the art of making a game.
mhm.
I don't have that problem here because it was cinematic storytelling to put you in situations that you can only achieve through the medium of developing a video game. And I think that that is the way you need to do it. That is how this does it. And I think if you have no idea who Indy is, like you said, no homework required. Jump in,
Mm-mm.
punch a couple of Nazis, and be like, okay, cool. Well, I'm like, this gets me caught up with the story. I'm gonna go watch Last Crusade now, and then fall in
Yeah,
love with the character and go watch the other movies. Or just play this and wait for the sequel and welcome to the indie fan club, because I don't think you can play
absolutely.
this and not be in love with this man.
It's
So
oh, it's so good. Wait, also, did you know that there's DLC coming?
I did not know that there's DLC
I so
coming.
I the review copy that I received came complete with all of the DLC and everything, like all the
Yes, with the
cosmetics.
Temple of Doom. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the
Yes.
booby fit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I tried to resist putting it on for the longest time, but the
Uh,
call was too strong, and I did
oh, I
turn
don't
it
blame
on
you.
after I left the Himalayas because I was like, no, I need to have it. Temple of Doom's my favorite for a reason.
Hell yeah. Um, Man, what was I gonna say? Oh, but
Oh,
no. So
DLC.
I was like down. It was like early today. I was downloading all the DLC so I could like run around in the different cosmetics as I'm like checking out side stuff. Which
Mhm.
also sidebar, I don't do side content in video games almost ever. And
Yeah.
so the fact that it's like, I mean, we talked about it already. It's incredible, and even that should speak to like just the amount of care that went into this game because it's full cutscenes on the same caliber as the main story. But I noticed that there was something, it was like The Den of Giants or something like that was the name of the DLC. And it said in the description, like, terms and release of DLC will be announced at a later date. But I didn't realize that that was part of what was happening, that there would be
Yeah.
DLC at all. So that's pretty exciting.
I'm
I'm very
excited.
excited to see like more of this.
Yeah, I am too. And I think that like to get to our ending bits, I think that this is, and I don't want to call it a movie adaptation because it's not an adaptation of a movie. It's just fitting into an existing like story, but like this is what I want. Like I feel like we're stuck in this age of remakes and sequels in gaming and in film. We're also stuck in this age of remakes and sequels and IP mining. And for some reason, this feels fresh. It feels old and it feels nostalgic and it feels like they had, I know they worked with Lucasfilm, but it feels like they had like George Lucas on one shoulder and Steven Spielberg on the other, like guiding what they were doing. And how do I say it? Like it hits me in a way that I didn't expect because it doesn't feel like it's nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. And I think that that is something that feels so refreshing. And I didn't think I would be saying this
Hmm.
about a game that is coming into an existing franchise. Yeah, I don't know. I'm in love with it. I'm in love with it. And I think I logged in today and I started playing more because I decided to play more. Because like you said, like especially when I'm reviewing a game, I get to roll credits. I do what I need to be where I need to be to roll to finish the game and review it. And most of the time I put it down. And then there are special instances where I'm like, no, I'm gonna play more.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start a new game or I'm gonna explore more side stuff. And it feels like I almost feel bad if I'm not exploring everything that this game gave me to
It feels
do.
wasteful almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, but yeah, that those are like my final notes on it. I think that look, Indiana Jones created my type when I was very young. Indiana Jones, Han Solo, Vegeta, they all have a unifying factor between them. And I think that this captured him in a way that I just really didn't know somebody else could do.
Hmm.
So I think people should play this. Charlie, what are your final notes on Indiana Jones and the Great Circle? And do you think people should play it?
I There are very few games that could have hit in the way that this did for me in this point in my life. In certain contexts, I just came off of like a really long trip, just like kind of going off by myself on like a fun adventure for a couple months. And it's kicked off what I think is going to be a couple years of doing this and just like going places all over the world, hostel hopping, finding places to work and sleep and eat for free, and just exploring and adventuring and like seeing the world and learning about cultures and immersing myself in other places. And this was kind of hitting as I'm getting over jet lag, as I'm readjusting, as I'm coming to terms with the fact that I'm staying with my parents until I find a new place to live or leave the country again. And it was so thrilling, so restorative to be able to go see other places, go to another time, and to do that in the shoes of and with these amazing characters that it for me hits so close to home. And beyond that context, I don't see a world in which I can't recommend this to someone unless they're
Yeah.
just not into this kind of game. And even
Yeah.
then, turn down the difficulty, rush through it,
Yeah.
just do the main quest and then like use a guide for the side stuff that seems interesting because there is so much here that is worth seeing. I'm like contemplating like forcing my dad who loves Indiana Jones as well to like sit down and play this. I'm going to be recommending it to friends that have Game Pass for like Call of Duty who
Yeah.
also like Indiana Jones because even if they don't play video games, this is a great indie adventure. And on the other side, I'm going to be recommending this to people who don't know anything about the movies, who just like kind of fun action games. And I think at the end of the day, people should play this. I love
Yeah.
MachineGames. I think they are one of the best studios working in the industry. They're personally my favorite outside of Nintendo. I really hope more people get to experience this game than maybe people did with Wolfenstein 2, for example.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Punch Nazis, explore
Punch
the
Nazis.
world, have like a vested interest in other people's culture and why it's cool to learn about them. I think those are all things that we can, take away from indie as being positive in our lives. Um,
100%.
Charlie, why don't you let people know where they can find you, read your work, and maybe even read your review?
Y'all can read my review for Start Menu. I'll send you the link to that to put down below. You can find me on social media at CHAS_MKE. That's Chaz Milwaukee. That's on Twitter and Instagram. And then on Blue Sky, you can find me at Don't Feed the Charlie Blue Sky Social. And I also recently launched a food blog where I'm kind of every week talking about stuff that I eat, hopefully some culture behind it, maybe some history, kind of doing my own archaeology through food. So if you wanna hear about that, I have links to that in the bios for pretty much all my social media stuff that I've listed. But you can read my work elsewhere, pretty much anywhere that'll pay me. So stay tuned, follow me on social media to hear more about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today,
Yeah,
Charlie.
thanks for having me.
And if you're listening and you want to follow me, I am Oh My Myth Randier on literally everything, although I'm mostly on Blue Sky these days. And you can read my 2,600 word review on
Hell
Indiana
yeah.
Jones in the comments below. I kind of get into everything and somehow avoided spoilers. It may be like the 3 paragraphs I dedicate to Spielbergian filmmaking, but yeah, who knows? Thank you for watching. Thank you, Charlie, for being on.